Ranger voice, breaking with panic. This isn't a bear. Get out, get out! Narrator, measured, steady, with weight. Most park rangers quit for reasons you can write down on paper. Long hours, poor pay, or the kind of loneliness only deep wilderness can deliver. But a few, a rare few, leave for reasons they don't ever talk about. They pack up their uniforms, turn in their radios, and vanish back into civilian life. Their files are clean, their records unremarkable. But ask the right questions, and you'll learn there's another story beneath the silence. A story that was never supposed to be told. This is the story of Ranger Michael Harlan. For 22 years, he served at Glacier National Park in Montana. He was the kind of ranger you'd trust in a storm, steady, dependable, never prone to exaggeration. Harlan was respected by the men and women who worked beside him, and known by locals as someone who always put the safety of hikers and campers above his own. But in the summer of 2011, something happened that made him walk away from the badge forever. No farewell speech, no retirement ceremony, just a sudden resignation, and silence that lasted for more than a decade. Narrator. For years, he refused interviews. He ignored phone calls from journalists and declined invitations to conferences where former rangers gather and trade stories. He turned down opportunities to teach new recruits, something he had once promised he'd do when he retired. Even his closest friends noticed the change. Harlan avoided conversations about the park, never spoke of his last patrol, and shut down anyone who pressed him about that final summer. To them, it was clear. Something happened in those woods that broke a man who had survived blizzards, wildfires, and encounters with predators most people will never face. Something happened that he could not put into words. Until now. What you are about to hear isn't stitched together from folklore, or campfire whispers, or second-hand tales. These words come directly from Harlan himself. In private recordings he made for his family, he described, in measured, almost clinical detail, the events that drove him to quit. He never intended them to reach the public. He never sought an audience. He only wanted his children to... And this story is only the beginning. Harlan's last summer began with what looked like a routine patrol, but the signs came early. Strange tracks on a trail no one used. Trees marked in patterns that didn't match the claw of any known predator, and a radio call that, for the first time in his career, trembled with fear. By the time he realized he wasn't dealing with an animal, it was too late. And when that transmission cut to silence, the park was never the same again. The truth about this park is that it never had a name that tourists remembered. The brochures showed postcard-perfect lakes and mountains, but locals always knew it was more than that. Behind the maps and trail markers, there were zones you'd never see printed in the visitor's guide. Entire sectors, fenced off without warning. Trails that appeared open one week and mysteriously closed the next. When hikers asked why, the rangers had an answer ready. Animal activity, unstable ground, seasonal maintenance. But the locals knew better. They whispered about areas where the forest felt wrong, where even the animals refused to wander. In the years leading up to Harlan's resignation, Freedom of Information Act requests were filed. Questions from journalists, researchers, and curious locals who wanted to know why so many incidents in the park were marked animal-related, yet entirely blacked out in official documents. Entire pages of reports reduced to lines of ink. The kind of redactions you'd expect from military files, not wildlife services. To most people, it seemed absurd. What could possibly be so dangerous, so unspeakable, that the government would blot out entire paragraphs about hikers or campers who disappeared? When the truth started leaking, it wasn't from scientists or officials. It came from the rangers themselves, men and women who had spent decades in the field, people who had seen everything, grizzlies up close, avalanches breaking without warning, entire wildfires swallowing valleys. They weren't easily shaken. Yet in the summer of 2011, 3 veteran rangers, all with clean records, all highly respected, resigned in the same week. The public explanation was budget cuts. That's the phrase that made its way into the press release. But the tapes they left behind. And trust me, you'll want to know why. Because once you understand what drove Harlan and his fellow rangers to abandon their posts, you'll never look at a national park the same way again. The first testimony comes from a ranger who chose to remain anonymous. His voice was recorded in what sounded like a late-night confessional, halting, uneasy, as though saying the words aloud made them more real. Ranger number 1 voice. I was walking the North Trail after a storm. Erosion had pulled back parts of the earth, and that's when I saw them. At first I thought they were old fire pits, shallow and scattered along the ridge. But when I leaned closer, I realized they weren't pits. They were graves. The soil had slumped just enough to reveal what was inside. What he described next was not in any official report. In the shallow depressions lay bones, skeletal remains, bent in ways that defied explanation, not broken by force of nature, twisted, as though the bodies had been contorted before death. The ranger later said the sight unsettled him more than any predator encounter, more than any accident he had worked. These weren't the remains of animals. They weren't scattered or gnawed. They were placed, arranged. Ranger number 1 voice. I radioed it in. I did what we're trained to do. But when my supervisor showed up, he didn't even step down into the pits. He just stared for a long time and then told me, "You didn't see that. File it as animal remains." His tone wasn't angry. It was final, like a warning. I pressed him on it, asked what kind of animal does that to bones. He didn't answer. He just walked away. The next night, the ranger returned, against orders. He wanted proof, photographs, samples, anything that would show he hadn't imagined it. But when he reached the site, the pits were gone. The ground was freshly packed, smooth, as though a heavy hand of earth had covered every trace. Ranger number 1 voice, barely above a whisper. It was like the earth swallowed them back up, like it wanted them hidden again. I stood there with my flashlight, scanning the soil, and I swear it looked too clean, too deliberate. No animal buries like that. No storm covers that evenly. It was like someone, or something, had been waiting for me to leave. The ranger filed nothing further. The second testimony comes from a ranger who worked night shifts near one of the old fire towers. His voice is sharper, more defensive, like a man trying to convince himself that what he saw wasn't real. Ranger number 2 voice. It started with my name. I heard it clear as day, drifting up from the tree line. It was my wife's voice, gentle, familiar. She called again, a little louder this time. Only she wasn't there. She was 200 miles away, asleep in our house. I knew that. I told myself I knew that. But when you hear your wife's voice calling your name in the dark, it's almost impossible not to answer. He left the tower briefly, stepping out into the cool night. That's when he turned the spotlight toward the trees. What it revealed has haunted him ever since. Ranger number 2 voice. Between the trunks, I saw it. A figure, pale as moonlight, standing too still. It had the outline of a person, but the face, it was smiling. Too wide, like the skin was stretched too tight. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just waited. The figure spoke again, not in its own voice, but in hers, the voice of his wife, over and over, repeating his name with the same tone she used at home, the same inflections, the same warmth, but hollow somehow, as though played through a broken speaker. It didn't stop, not for hours. It called his name until the horizon bled gray with dawn. Ranger number 2 voice. I couldn't take it. I left the tower. I broke protocol. I never went back. I told them I was done, and I meant it. I never wanted to hear that voice again, not out there, not like that. The strangest detail came later. Weeks after his resignation, The ranger's wife admitted something she had never shared before. That same night, while asleep in her bed 200 miles away, she dreamed of being in the woods. She dreamed she was standing among the trees, calling for her husband to come closer. This is MindFuel. Subscribe, because these testimonies are only the surface. The deeper we go, the more the forest itself begins to sound alive. And if you've heard your name whispered from the dark, you already know what these rangers were up against. The third testimony was recorded months after his resignation, the ranger's voice uneven, carrying the weight of someone still trying to forget. He describes being called out with a partner to inspect an old mine shaft that had partially collapsed after heavy rain. Ranger number 3 voice. The shaft wasn't supposed to go far, just a shallow cut into the hillside. But when we cleared the debris and stepped inside, we found something else. An underground chamber, wide enough for the two of us to stand side by side. The air was stale, heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. And then we saw what was hanging there. Dozens of ranger uniforms lined the walls, hanging from rusted hooks as though displayed like trophies. The cloth was brittle, eaten away by time, but some were unmistakably newer. One uniform still carried the dark outline of a fresh stain. Blood. Ranger number 3 voice. We weren't the first rangers here, and some never left. That's all I could think, staring at those jackets. Some still had name patches, names I didn't recognize. Others looked stripped bare, like whoever wore them had been erased. My partner wouldn't even step closer. He just shined his light once, shook his head, and said we needed to get out. They reported the chamber, following protocol, but their supervisor's response was immediate and final. The mine was to be sealed permanently. No photographs, no inventory, no discussion. Just cover it and walk away. Ranger number 3 voice, whispering now, almost to himself. We did what we were told. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I put on my uniform after that, I wondered if it would end up hanging in that chamber, waiting for the next man to stumble across it. This is MindFuel. Subscribe, because these aren't stories you'll find in official records. These are the voices of men who were ordered into silence, and who broke that silence at a cost. And if uniforms can hang like trophies beneath the ground, what else might be hidden under the earth of this park? 3 testimonies, 3 different rangers, yet each account circles back to the same unsettling pattern. The shallow graves where twisted bones vanished overnight. The mimic in the woods, stealing voices and faces that didn't belong to it. The buried room, where uniforms hung like trophies of those who never came home. Different men, different patrols, different years, but one thread runs through them all. Something is moving in that park. Something predatory, something intelligent, and most disturbing of all, it is not being hunted or studied or removed. It is being allowed to roam, allowed to feed. A leaked memo, obtained years after these resignations, hints at the truth officials refuse to put in writing. The header reads, Sector 9, containment failed. Recommend personnel rotation every 3 months. The meaning is as cold as it is clear. The rangers themselves were never meant to protect the land. They were meant to serve as distractions, sacrifices. When 3 rangers resigned the same week, the press release blamed budget cuts. But the men themselves knew. Their testimonies confirm it. There are places in that park where even the strongest won't last. Places where something waits. Something that knows the sound of your name, the weight of your footsteps, the smell of your fear. This is MindFuel. Subscribe, because the stories we uncover aren't just legends. They are fragments of the truth, scattered and buried, waiting for someone to piece them together. And when you see the pattern these rangers left behind, you'll realize the cover-up is larger than one park, and far from over. The final testimony comes from one of the youngest rangers assigned to the park. Unlike the others, his career had barely begun. He had no reason to exaggerate, no reputation to protect. Yet his account would become the breaking point, the moment that convinced even the most skeptical colleagues that something in those woods was beyond their control. He was sent out on a standard recovery, a hiker overdue, reported missing by her family. The job was simple: sweep the ridge, call her name, bring her in. But when he finally found her, crouched at the base of an oak, the woman was not screaming for help. She was whispering Ranger number 4 voice, quiet, shaking. She clutched at my arm, eyes wide, and begged me not to let it see her. I told her she was safe now, but she kept repeating it over and over. Don't let it see me. Don't let it see me. He turned to follow her gaze. In the branches overhead, crouched between the limbs, was a figure watching. Its body bent at an unnatural angle, clinging as though it had grown out of the bark itself. And its eyes, they were like mirrors, twin panes of glass that reflected not the trees, not the night sky, but his own face staring back at him. Ranger number 4 voice. And then the hiker, the woman, she stopped trembling. She started laughing, but it wasn't her laugh. It was mine, my voice coming out of her mouth. Hearing myself laugh from someone else's body, there's no way to explain what that does to you. I froze. I couldn't breathe. And that's when I knew I wasn't bringing anyone back from that ridge. The ranger resigned the very next morning. He didn't wait for questions, didn't ask for leave. He mailed in his badge with a single line scrawled across a note. You can keep the woods. They already own it. This is MindFuel. Subscribe, because what you've just heard is only a fragment of the testimonies sealed away in redacted files and silenced voices. And if one truth stands clear, it's this. Some places were never meant to be guarded. They were meant to be feared. Some parks close for weather, others for fire risk. But sometimes, they close trails because the rangers won't go back. And if those who guard the woods won't stay, what chance do we have? Out there, past the trail markers and the comfort of campfires, the ground does not belong to us. The silence is not empty. The trees are not still. And the ones who disappear, they're not always taken by accident. Picture this: a ranger's dash cam, headlights cutting through the black, gravel popping under the tires as the truck rolls down the service road. In the rearview mirror, something moves, low, fast, keeping pace on all fours. Its shape is wrong, its limbs bending in ways the human body shouldn't. The ranger doesn't slow down, doesn't speak. The camera shakes with each turn until the forest finally breaks open into highway. But even as the taillights vanish into the night, the radio hisses with static. Beneath it, a voice slips through, flat, metallic, too close to be far away. Still watching, and the recording ends.